imagine you are stepping into a standard commercial elevator. You hit the button for your floor, right? And those heavy metal doors slide shut behind you.
Yeah, a totally normal day.
Exactly. But instead of moving, the elevator just stops. And now, picture being stuck in that exact space, not for an hour, not for a weekend, but for like over 6 months.
Wow.
And you aren't in there alone either. You are crammed into that box with about 130 other people.
Oh,
and you are floating hundreds of meters underwater, operating a literal nuclear reactor.
right.
And if anyone makes a single microscopic error in their daily routine, it could be fatal for absolutely everyone. Welcome to the reality of submarine life. Today, our mission in this deep dive is to unpack the extreme, high-stakes reality of living in a sealed steel tube deep under the ocean.
It's just an absolute endurance test. I mean, it completely challenges the limits of human biology and psychology.
Yeah.
The sheer scale of this isolation is, it's almost impossible to comprehend until you look at the raw numbers.
Right.
Take the HMS Vengeance, for example. In 2024, that cruise set a record by remaining completely submerged for 201 days.
201 days.
Yeah. That is over half a year without taking a breath of fresh air, without feeling the wind, and without seeing a single ray of natural sunlight.
Okay, let's unpack this because my brain genuinely struggles to process what 201 days in a metal tube actually looks like.
Oh, absolutely.
When you are roughly 200 meters below sea level, the overarching reality is that the margin for error is exactly zero. Like, we tend to think of submarine crews as warriors, right? Fighting foreign navies or dodging enemy torpedoes.
Sure, the cinematic stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But really, their primary enemy is the silent ocean trying to crush the hull. It's the incredibly complex machinery keeping them breathing. And quite honestly, it's their own minds.
That is the core thesis of this entire environment. I mean, before we even get into the life and death engineering of, how you breathe or drink underwater, we really have to establish the physical reality of the space itself.
Because space dictates everything.
Exactly. Everything, the technology, the schedules, the psychology is entirely dictated by the lack of physical volume. People often hold on to this romanticized idea of submarine life from movies. You picture a captain calmly looking through a periscope in a spacious, dimly lit control room.
Right, walking around freely.
But the physical truth is shockingly restrictive. Let's look at a baseline for confinement, a standard prison cell.
Okay.
A typical inmate is afforded about 80 square feet of space. A submarine crew member, on the other hand, gets roughly 20 square feet.
Wait, 20 square feet?
Yes.
So a highly trained naval professional gets, like, a quarter of the space of an inmate in a prison.
Precisely.
That is essentially the footprint of a small walk-in closet, and that is your entire world for 6 months.
And it gets worse, because that 20 square feet isn't a private room. Privacy is an entirely non-existent concept down there. An individual's personal space only extends to the literal width of their shoulders. Whenever you move from one end of the vessel to the other, you are constantly turning sideways. You're brushing past people, stepping over legs in the narrow corridors.
That sounds exhausting.
It really is. And because of this relentless physical proximity, claustrophobia isn't just an inconvenience or a mild phobia. It is a critical operational danger. It's aggressively screened for during naval selection.
I would imagine so.
Yeah, if a recruit shows the absolute slightest hint of anxiety or an elevated heart rate in a confined space, it results in immediate rejection.
Which makes perfect sense when you strip away the military aspect.
Yeah.
Like, this sounds less like a tactical deployment and more like an extreme psychological experiment.
Oh, 100%.
Think about your own workplace, right? You, listening to this, we all have that one coworker who, tapped their pen too loudly or just generally annoys us.
We all know the one.
Right. Now imagine the mental strain of knowing you cannot physically step away from that person for 6 months. You share the same recycled air, you stare at the same identical gray walls, you smell the same smells.
And no family contact.
Exactly. You have absolutely zero contact with your family to vent about it. In that kind of pressure cooker, a petty argument over someone bumping into you doesn't just ruin your day. It could legitimately become dangerous.
It becomes a direct threat to the safety of the entire vessel. In a state of claustrophobic panic or even just prolonged severe anxiety, human biology actively works against you.
Right, your stress response kicks in.
Exactly. Cortisol levels spike, cognitive function drops, and the decisions you make become erratic. In a sealed tube where turning the wrong valve can flood a compartment, you simply cannot afford a crew member whose brain is misfiring because they feel trapped.
And the natural human response to feeling overwhelmed is to retreat, right? To go to your bedroom, shut the door, and just sleep it off.
Yeah, but you can't do that here.
You really can't. This lack of physical space invades even the most vulnerable human necessity, which is sleep. And I think that brings us to the brutal logistics of hot bunking.
Yeah, the sleeping arrangements are a stark reminder that a submarine is designed to protect complex machinery, not to provide comfort for the crew.
Obviously not.
Right. There are no private bedrooms. The bunks are universally described as coffin-like.
Coffin-like.
Yeah. They are stacked in tiers, squeezed into literally any available crevice of the ship, and they are so tight vertically that a person can only lie completely flat.
You can't even sit up.
No, it is physically impossible to sit up in your bed to read a book or put your shoes on.
Oh man, I am trying to visualize that.
Mm-hmm.
You essentially have to slide yourself into this dark horizontal slot. And the craziest part is that it isn't even your slot.
No, it's not.
The numbers on a vessel like the USS Missouri really put this into perspective. They operate with a crew of 135 members.
Mm-hmm.
But the submarine is only built with 94 beds.
The physical math simply does not allow for everyone to sleep at the same time. You literally cannot fit 135 horizontal bodies into the architecture.
So they have to share.
Exactly. This necessitates the shift-based system of hot bunking. The crew is divided into watches. The moment one sailor wakes up to go start their shift, another sailor, who is exhausted from just finishing theirs, climbs into that exact same bed.
Meaning the mattress never actually gets cold?
Never.
Imagine finishing a grueling high-stakes shift, and the only place you have to retreat to is a dark, cramped shelf that is still physically warm and smelling of the coworker who just rolled out of it.
Every single day.
Every single day for 200 days.
What's fascinating here is the biological implication of all of this. Beyond the obvious discomfort of a shared warm bed, you are fighting a war against your own circadian rhythm.
Because there's no sun.
Exactly. Down there at 200 meters, day and night simply do not exist. There are no windows. It is a perpetual state of artificial existence. So the crew has to artificially override the human body's natural sleep cycle.
How do they even do that?
They do this entirely through environmental manipulation, specifically using colored light bulbs. During the designated day hours of the vessel, the submarine is lit with bright white lights that mimic natural daylight, which suppresses melatonin.
Okay, but when you have 3 different shifts operating, someone's night is someone else's middle of the workday.
Right. It's a huge conflict.
So how do you signal to the brain that it's time to sleep without plunging the people actively working into total darkness?
They transition the ambient lighting to a deep red.
Just red lights everywhere.
Yeah. Red light has a much lower color temperature, and it doesn't bleach the rhodopsin in the human eye the way blue or white light does.
Okay.
This red hue allows the sailors on duty to still see their instruments and maintain their night vision for looking through scopes. But simultaneously, it signals to the brains of the off-duty sailors that the sun has gone down.
That triggers the sleep cues.
Exactly, triggering the biological cues needed to fall asleep in those tiny coffin bunks.
It is essentially forced biohacking.
Mm.
But I mean, even with perfectly engineered lighting, living with zero privacy, sleeping in a warm slot, and working under artificial red lights is going to wear down your psyche.
Without it,
You need an anchor to keep from losing your mind. And it turns out the ultimate psychological tool on a nuclear submarine isn't a therapy session. It's the food.
Food completely transforms in this setting. It goes from mere caloric intake to the primary structural anchor of the cruise day. When a submarine deploys, it loads up an astonishing amount of provisions, often upwards of 20,000 kilograms of food for a long deployment.
That's massive.
It is. But again, the physical reality of the submarine dictates the logistics. There is no massive walk-in pantry. Space is so tight that they have to store this food anywhere it can physically fit.
I read about this. Because space is so tight, they literally end up walking on top of their own food supply.
Yes, they do.
They pack the cans and the heavy boxes directly onto the floors of the corridors, and then they cover them with a temporary walkway. So as the deployment goes on, they eat their way through the floor, slowly lowering the walking level of the submarine as the trip progresses.
Exactly. Now, in the first few weeks, morale is generally higher because they still have fresh perishables, apples, lettuce, fresh dairy.
Sure.
But those spoil quickly. For the remaining 5 or 6 months, the diet is strictly canned, dried, and frozen food. And the preparation is heavily restricted. Because a submarine is a sealed, oxygen-managed environment, open flames are strictly prohibited.
Well, yeah, fire on a sub sounds bad.
A grease fire in a kitchen on land is bad. A fire inside a submerged steel tube is a catastrophic, fatal event. All cooking has to be done on enclosed electric stoves and ovens.
Yet, despite all these limitations, they actually serve 4 meals a day instead of the standard 3.
That's right.
You have your breakfast, lunch, and dinner, but they introduce a 4th meal known as mid-rats, which is short for midnight rations. My initial thought was, if they were just walking around a tiny tube, why would they need an extra meal?
The environment inside a submarine is deeply stressful on a physiological level. The constant vibrating hum of the nuclear reactor and the machinery, the lack of personal space, the disruption of the circadian rhythm.
Just constant tension.
Exactly. It keeps the human nervous system in a heightened state of alertness. The crew's bodies literally run hotter. They burn significantly more calories managing that baseline stress than they would sitting at a desk on land.
Oh, that makes sense.
The mid-rats are biologically essential to replenish that energy, particularly for the crew working the night shifts when their bodies are desperately trying to shut down.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. We typically view military food as strictly utilitarian, right? Just raw fuel poured into the human machine to keep it operating. But the kitchen is actually the primary defense mechanism against crew depression. When every single day looks exactly the same, the only variety you experience in a 6-month window is what is on your plate.
It's the only novelty they get.
Exactly. If the food becomes bland or repetitive, morale plummets. And we've already established how dangerous a depressed, unfocused crew can be. So the Navy intentionally uses things like soft-serve ice cream machines and dedicated steak nights, not as luxuries, but as tactical psychological boosters.
It gives the crew something to look forward to.
Yeah, it marks the passage of time.
It creates a sense of normalcy in a deeply abnormal environment. But while food keeps the mind resilient, the body still requires the absolute raw elements of physical survival. We have a crew with full stomachs, but they still need to breathe, and they still need to drink.
Right.
This brings us to the astonishing engineering required to manufacture an atmosphere and a water supply entirely from scratch.
Right, because when the air gets stale, you can't just crack a window. And obviously, 130 people consume a massive amount of oxygen. The intuitive solution would be to just pack the submarine full of giant scuba tanks.
Right. That's what most people assume.
But storing a 6-month supply of compressed oxygen is essentially building a massive bomb. Pure compressed oxygen is incredibly volatile. The slightest spark would tear the submarine apart. So they don't bring their oxygen with them, they manufacture it on the go.
They rely entirely on the ocean outside. They use a highly energy-intensive process called electrolysis.
Okay, how does that work?
The submarine takes in salty seawater, purifies it, and then runs a massive electrical current directly through the water. Water, as we know, is H2O. 2 hydrogen atoms bonded to 1 oxygen atom.
Basic chemistry.
Right. It is a very stubborn molecular bond. But the electrical current acts like a chemical crowbar. It literally rips the water molecules apart, forcing the hydrogen and oxygen to separate.
It is wild to think about the scale of this. An average person needs about 600 liters of oxygen a day to survive. Multiply that by a crew of 130, and that electrolysis machine has to flawlessly rip apart enough water to produce 78,000 liters of fresh oxygen every single day.
It's an incredible feat of engineering.
And the oxygen gets pumped into the ventilation system for the crew to breathe. But wait, what happens to the hydrogen? Hydrogen gas is famously explosive. It's what brought down the Hindenburg.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, a submarine operates very much like an underwater space station. It is a completely closed-loop system where every single input creates an output that must be meticulously managed.
So they have to get rid of it.
Yes. The highly flammable hydrogen gas cannot be allowed to accumulate inside the hull. The machinery compresses it and carefully forces it back out of the submarine into the ocean.
Okay, good.
But producing oxygen is only half of the atmospheric battle. The crew is breathing that fresh oxygen in, which means they are constantly exhaling carbon dioxide back into the sealed tube.
And CO2 is a silent killer. If the carbon dioxide levels in the air build up to just 10%, it becomes lethal. I am trying to picture how you get rid of a toxic gas in a sealed balloon without just venting all your air out and losing your atmospheric pressure entirely.
You have to scrub it out of the air chemically. Submarines use massive scrubber units that spray a specialized liquid chemical compound called amine.
Amine.
Amine has this fascinating chemical property where, when it is cool, it acts like a magnet for carbon dioxide. As the submarine's air is blown through the scrubbers, the liquid amine physically grabs the CO2 molecules out of the air, trapping them.
Like a filter.
Exactly. Then, in a separate chamber, the machine heats the amine up. The heat breaks the magnetic-like bond. The amine releases the CO2 gas into a compressor, and that toxic gas is forcefully pumped out into the ocean.
But what happens if the power fails? Like, if the reactor goes down and the amine scrubbers stop pumping, the clock immediately starts ticking on the crew's air supply.
Engineering in this environment requires fail-safes for the fail-safes. If the primary scrubbers go offline, the crew turns to an emergency chemical solution: canisters filled with solid lithium hydroxide.
This is the part that sounds like pure magic to me. How does a canister of powder save you from suffocating?
It's a direct chemical reaction. When the crew forces the ambient air through these canisters, the lithium hydroxide physically reacts with the carbon dioxide gas. It essentially binds with the gas and turns it into a solid compound, lithium carbonate.
Wait, really?
Yeah, it literally pulls the invisible toxic gas out of the air and traps it permanently as a solid rock.
It's like a chemical sponge that turns into concrete as it absorbs the gas.
Pretty much.
But that solves one problem, it creates another. Once that canister is full of rock, it's useless. It becomes trash. And on a submarine, trash is a massive logistical nightmare.
Oh, absolutely.
You can't just toss a garbage bag out the back door. Everything, empty food cans, used air scrubbers, packaging it all has to be compacted into tight steel cylinders. Sometimes they store it on board, but sometimes they literally have to load the trash cylinders into the torpedo tubes and fire them out into the ocean just to make room.
Which perfectly transitions to the other massive input and output challenge: water.
Right.
It is a profound paradox. The submarine is completely enveloped by billions of gallons of water, yet hydration is a constant engineering hurdle because every drop outside the hull is undrinkable salt water.
Exactly. So to survive, they have to purify it. On nuclear-powered submarines, which generate an abundance of excess heat, they primarily use distillation. They essentially boil the seawater inside a vacuum, leaving the heavy salt behind, and collect the pure steam as drinking water.
That's for the nuclear ones, yes.
And then modern conventional submarines often rely on industrial reverse osmosis, forcing the seawater through microscopic filters that physically block the salt molecules.
Both processes are highly effective, but they are relatively slow and incredibly energy intensive. Because the machines can only produce a set amount of fresh water per hour, and that water is desperately needed to cool the reactor, make the oxygen, and cook the food, the water allocated for human hygiene is placed at the absolute bottom of the priority list.
And this leads to one of the most jarring daily realities of the crew. They have machines capable of generating fresh water. They are entirely submerged in the ocean, and yet water is so strictly rationed that sailors are only allowed a 60-second shower.
Just 1 minute.
You turn the water on to get wet.
Mm-hmm.
You instantly turn it off. You stand there shivering while you soap up your hair and your body, and then you turn it back on for a few seconds to rinse the suds off. That's it. It just highlights how unbelievably fragile the ecosystem of that steel tube really is.
It is a delicate balance of physics and chemistry, and that fragility brings us to the ultimate intersection of human biology and complex machinery, the plumbing. We've established how difficult it is to manage the inputs, the food, the air, the water. Now we have to address the outputs, human waste.
Yeah, we have to talk about what happens when 130 people are eating 4 meals a day. And this leads to what is undoubtedly the most terrifying, absurd, and cautionary historical event in our deep dive today.
Managing waste on a submarine is a genuine high-stakes tactical challenge. On land, you flush a toilet and gravity gently pulls the water down a pipe. In a submarine, you are hundreds of meters underwater. The ocean outside is pushing against the hull with immense, crushing pressure.
So much pressure.
At 200 meters deep, the water pressure is nearly 300 pounds per square inch. If you simply opened a pipe to the outside, the ocean wouldn't just trickle in. It would act like a cannon, blasting seawater back inside with enough force to cut a person in half.
So to safely get rid of waste, it is first gathered in internal sanitary tanks. When those tanks are full, the crew has to use incredibly powerful, high-pressure mechanical pumps to forcefully blast the waste out of the submarine, physically overpowering the crushing weight of the ocean outside.
And executing that flush requires opening and closing a highly specific sequential series of heavy valves. There is an inside valve holding back the waste and an outside valve holding back the ocean. If you mess up the sequence, if you open the outside valve before the inside valve is locked down, the ocean wins.
It rushes right in.
Which brings us to the disastrous fate of the U-1206.
So what does this all mean? Let's go back to World War II. The U-1206 was an advanced Nazi German submarine, hiding deep in the freezing waters of the North Sea. They were running silent, actively evading the British naval forces patrolling the surface directly above them.
The U-1206 was equipped with a highly complex, state-of-the-art deep-water plumbing system. It was so complicated that the Navy actually required a specially trained engineer just to operate the toilet.
Just to flush it.
Yes. But on this specific patrol, the captain of the vessel decided he needed to use the restroom, and he decided to operate the flush valves himself.
He goes in, does his business, and starts turning the heavy metal wheels. But he gets the sequence wrong. He opens the wrong valve at the wrong time.
The reaction was instantaneous and violent. The immense pressure of the North Sea blasted the toilet water and a torrent of freezing ocean water straight up through the plumbing and into the submarine.
What a nightmare.
But the flooding wasn't even the deadliest part. In that specific submarine model, the massive lead-acid battery banks that powered the electrical engines were located directly beneath the bathroom floor.
It is almost comical how bad of a design that is. Like the freezing seawater floods down into the compartment and immediately spills over these massive, highly volatile batteries.
When salt water violently mixes with battery acid, it triggers a rapid chemical reaction that instantly produces a thick, lethal cloud of chlorine gas. So within seconds of flushing a toilet incorrectly, the sealed submarine began filling with a toxic gas cloud that was burning the lungs of the crew.
The captain is suddenly faced with an impossible choice. You stay submerged and hide from the British, but your entire crew chokes to death on chlorine gas in the dark. Or you blow the ballast tanks and violently surface the submarine to get fresh air. To keep his men from dying, he orders the submarine to the surface.
They burst through the surface of the North Sea, venting the gas right into the immediate crosshairs of the British Navy and Air Force, who had been waiting right above them. The submarine was instantly targeted and destroyed, and the surviving crew members were captured as prisoners of war.
An entire, highly advanced military warship, completely destroyed and captured. Not because it was outmaneuvered, not because of an enemy torpedo, but because of a routine, mundane bathroom trip.
It's wild.
The physics of the deep sea are just that unforgiving. There's another brief incident in 1944 with the USS Tang, where a microscopic mechanical failure in a torpedo caused it to violently circle back around in the water and sink the very submarine that fired it.
Both the U-1206 and the USS Tang perfectly encapsulate our core theme today. Submarine life is a continuous, relentless battle against the environment. Yes, they are warships, but hour by hour, minute by minute, the crew is fighting against claustrophobia. They are fighting the psychological toll of artificial sleep.
Exactly.
They are managing incredibly volatile chemistry that has zero tolerance for a turned valve or a dropped wrench, and they are fighting the literal crushing weight of the ocean itself.
I can honestly say, after going through all of this, I will never take my moderately spacious bedroom for granted ever again. I will definitely never take opening a window for granted, or the luxury of standing in a hot shower for a full 10 minutes. The level of mental discipline and engineering mastery required to just exist in that environment is beyond comprehension.
It demands a level of adaptation that fundamentally alters a person. We've spent this entire deep dive exploring the psychological and physical toll of adjusting to the submarine, the forced sleep cycles, the hot bunking, the constant brushing of shoulders. But as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final lingering thought.
What's that?
We know how hard it is to shrink your world down to 20 square feet. But what happens to the human psyche when the mission is finally over? After 201 days confined in a tight, red-lit, meticulously regulated steel tube where your survival depends on staring at gauges and never being more than a few inches from another human being.
Yeah.
How incredibly jarring, how terrifyingly overwhelming must it be to finally climb out of that heavy metal hatch, look up, and try to process the boundless, chaotic, unstructured freedom of the open sky.